Stacey Mackie had conquered many obstacles to live an independent, rewarding life.
We used to go out shopping, you know, we used to like to go out shopping, and she loved clothes. She loved to buy clothes.
Terence Armour was suffering from depression and was a ticking time bomb.
He was just somebody that wasn't on our radar at all.
When they met, they became friends, but Armour's affection became too intense.
At one point, he told her that he loved her and that he thought of her as his own daughter. She was like a daughter to him.
So when Stacey broke off their friendship, he became possessive and determined to kill.
And this is one of the key factors that you can sort of detect in this kind of behaviour, is this sudden switch from Mr. Nice Guy to Mr. Nasty.
In a crime that shocked the holiday town of Kendal and a small family, Armour was caught on CCTV breaking into Stacey's flat to burn her alive. Doctors tried for 15 hours but couldn't save her. Two shared lives, destined to tragically collide. This is the story of Terence Armour's countdown to murder. "34-year-old Stacey Mackie was full of life. She loved horses and she loved her mum and sister.
We did lots of things together. I took her for her hair. She had hair extensions put in. And then she had them took out. We used to go out shopping, you know. We used to like to go out shopping, and she loved clothes.
She'd always forgive anyone, not that she'd fall out with them in the first place to need to forgive them, but she got on with everyone really, but where it's a good thing, it's also, well, was bad because she couldn't see any wrong in anyone.
But Stacey had a lifetime of mental and physical health issues. It meant she would make many visits to hospitals and clinics, and that brought her into contact with Terence Armour. They became friends, but he grew possessive and unpredictable. This made Stacey anxious, so she broke off their friendship.
This obviously made him feel even more projected and unhappy about what was happening between them.
When she broke it off, this is kind of a red rag to a bull. If you are of a stalking type, a controlling type of person, how dare your controlled little pet suddenly spring up and have its own ego and decide it's going to go? That's not allowed.
He started threatening her, so Stacey called the police. It was Terence Armour's trigger for murder. He thought Stacey wanted nothing more to do with him. He couldn't face the rejection and decided to teach Stacey a lesson in the most horrifying way imaginable. Stacey Mackie was born in 1976 and grew up here in Haverick, Cumbria.
When Stacey was born with clicky hips, and she had what turned out to be spina bifida. She had a patch of dark hair on the back of her base of her spine, and like a spurry bone that stuck out. And I think I was classed as an over-anxious mother at the time. But eventually she was diagnosed, and she had major surgery at Newcastle General Hospital when she was 4.
Stacey's father left home, and her mum brought her up alone.
It's a long time ago, you know, I was 18. I had no experience of children. I'd never looked after a baby or a child.
After surgery to correct her spine, Stacey enjoyed a happy childhood.
Despite having spinal problems, she gave everything a go. Horses were a passion. She would disappear for hours on end, you know, from she was very young. Funniest memory, I think one day when she totally disappeared, and I didn't know where she was, you know, and she came back totally, you know, what's the problem? You know, the police are out looking for me. You know, I've only been out on the pony. I'm fine.
Terence Armour was born in 1951 and grew up in Kendal in the Lake District.
We do know he was married in 1974 to a lady where they had 2 children. However, they divorced in 1986, and in 1989 he met a new partner with whom he was with for about 20 years. This was someone that he was able to either control but at least relate to over the long term.
Like Stacey, he also had spinal problems.
He didn't have great physical health because of, I think he had tumours on his spine, and he had to have some operations to deal with that. So this had left him quite wizened and stooped, and he wasn't very mobile at all.
Armour had no criminal past.
He wasn't on the police radar. He had a few minor convictions from a lot of years ago, going back to, I think it was the 60s, but certainly nothing more than that. And he was just somebody that wasn't on our radar at all.
When Stacey left school at 16, she had one ambition.
She was training to be a groom at Winless-Beck, which is in Windermere, and that was happy. You know, she enjoyed that, although she thought the horses were worked a bit hard at times, you know. That was her passion, was horses. You know, she had a gift. She did have a gift for horsemanship.
When she was 18, her mother met a new partner, and in 1996, Stacey's sister was born.
She wasn't like a big sister as in like bossy. She was just, I don't know, she was just Stace. She was just, wouldn't say anything bad about anyone, so she wouldn't ever, you wouldn't ever like argue with her or anything like that.
As Imogen grew up, Stacey shared her love of horses with her.
I can still remember, like, now if I ride now, I can hear like her voice in my head, like shouting at me, telling me not to do things or put my hands down or put my leg on more or not rely on my hands as much. And I just remember in the field and how much she loved the horses, really, and her teaching me everything, really.
But in her mid-20s, Stacey developed a mental illness.
They kept changing their minds about a diagnosis. You know, at one point she was paranoid schizophrenic, and then she had schizoaffective disorder. But in truth, at night time, mainly at night time, Stacey would think that she heard things. It may have been just the pipes cooling down, central heating pipes. But she would think that, you know, it was something else, you know, and at times she did hear voices.
Although Stacey adored working with horses, she realised she didn't have the skills to make a success of it.
It was a job, but then sadly she had to give it up because the more complex it became, it was a bit much for her.
So she came back to live in Haverig. She became anorexic, and her mental health deteriorated. Her mum couldn't give her the help she needed.
I'd been her carer when she lived in Haverig. But to have access to more services, Kendal had a supported housing, sheltered housing unit, which we thought we went to look at together, and Stacey thought that she would really like to give living there a chance, you know, because there's people, similar situations to herself.
So on the 4th of October 2010, Stacey moved to sheltered accommodation called Crag View in the heart of Kendal.
So she consequently went to live in Crag View. And she was happy in Kendal, you know, she got friends there. She was starting to get her life back on track.
But the independence she gained by moving to her own flat would also lead her to meet Terence Armour.
I had a sixth sense. I don't know what it was. I just felt really uneasy about him.
34-year-old Stacey Mackie moved into sheltered accommodation in Kendal in October 2010. Her mum helped her move in and her sister helped celebrate.
Her room, there was quite a lot of purple, like on it. Bed covers and things. She liked purple. She had horses up, and she had, I've got it in my room now, but in her room she had a picture frame of like one of the school photos you have taken when you're little of me and my sister together.
In December that year, Terence Armour was at home in Butterywell Road in the centre of Kendal in Cumbria, grieving the loss of his wife to breast cancer. Her death sent him spiralling into depression. The only clue to Armour's presence in daylight hours was the sound of music coming from his flat.
Neighbours said that he was quite a quiet man. You would see him coming in and out, but there was no particular reason why you would notice him. You would hear music occasionally from his flat. Apparently he used to listen to rock and country music, but there was no kind of indication of the fact he was dangerous or anything like that.
He would spend the rest of his time propping up the bar at his local in Kendal.
He used to live in the town and go to the pub. He was known for being a regular there, though there wasn't anything particularly spectacular about him really. He would just go and visit and have a drink of an evening.
But all was not as it seemed.
Armour was believed to be wheelchair bound. He had a number of medical conditions that meant that he was basically a recluse in his own house. Or so we thought at the time, and so most other people thought.
But Armour only used his wheelchair when it suited him.
He basically had a great big hump on his back, and he walked with a stoop and he struggled to walk. And he played on that, very much so.
But his mental state was deteriorating.
So Armour's partner died in December 2010. And it's had a very bad effect on him, and he himself had to go into hospital to be treated for depression.
In March 2011, Stacey Mackie was in the same hospital for routine treatment of her condition. It was here that Terence Armour met Stacey Mackie.
I believe Terence Armour to have been an inpatient there at the same time, but he was suffering from what I believe to be depression, mild depression, following the loss of his partner. And I saw him once, myself, just once, in the hospital when Stacey and I were in the day room, and he went by and he shouted something to Stacey, and he was in a wheelchair. And I said, "Who was that?" And she just said, "He's another resident," I think she said. Or another patient.
When they left hospital, they kept up their friendship.
And she said, "He won't hurt me, Mum, he's in a wheelchair." And I said, "OK, as long as you watch what you're doing." And occasionally she said, I said, "Oh, your flowers are nice," because she always loved flowers in the house. And she said Terry had sent her flowers, and again I warned her.
But Stacey and Armour had become close friends and would frequently eat and drink together.
She said she was going round to his flat for a meal or going to the pub, and I warned her to be careful, as I did with any friendship that she would take up, because Stacey was vulnerable in so much as she didn't see danger. She didn't see what we would see. She just took everybody at face value.
But their friendship was purely platonic.
There was a lot of speculation at the time that there was talk of a relationship between them, but that was never ever established. In fact, to the contrary, they were always just seen as a platonic friendship, despite the fact that he was a lot older. there was talk of him being a father-daughter relationship rather than anything more than that, and there was certainly nothing that we found that would indicate there was anything more than that at all.
Stacey and Armour spent Christmas of 2011 together.
You know, the friendship was platonic. And at Christmas, he'd given her a bracelet.
But Armour was starting to want more.
At one point, he told her that he loved her.
I think with Stacey, the friendship with Armour had begun to kind of move a little bit too close to a personal relationship that she didn't really want. I think she saw Armour, generally speaking, as just yet another friend, another little outpost, another person that she could relate to sporadically, not as a very close individual person that was going to be the one in her life, as perhaps Armour saw himself.
Stacey decided to cool their friendship and stop seeing him. It was a month before she would make contact with him again.
She hadn't been in touch with him, and she just rang to apologise, really, as you would with a friend. And she wasn't expecting the reaction that she got. And that was, he went ballistic. They were her words. She said he went mad. And she said she didn't understand. She said, he said, well, he swore. He said, don't bother again, And he said, don't be in touch again, I don't, And she said, I won't.
This is a very kind of self-centred view, and he would become incredibly frustrated if she denied that, she wanted him. It's not the kind of thing that she's going to really want. So he will immediately switch, and this is one of the key factors that you can sort of detect in this kind of behaviour, is this sudden switch from Mr. Nice Guy to Mr. Nasty.
But Armour's fury had been ignited. He started to call and text incessantly.
He was asking questions about why she wouldn't speak to him, what it was he'd done. He couldn't understand, but you could see that he was getting more and more exasperated by the fact that she just wasn't responding to any of his calls.
Armour was refusing to let go.
He was looking for answers as to why she no longer wanted to be his friend, and there was communication or conversation around him wanting return of presents that he'd given to her over the Christmas period.
He was bombarding her. He wouldn't. She couldn't answer the phone without she checked who was calling. He also, I believe, managed to get hold of another mobile phone. But if it was an odd number or a number she didn't recognise, she didn't answer it.
I don't think he ever threatened her in the text messages. I don't think he ever said he intended to hurt her. I think there was just more of a sense of him being angry, that he'd felt that he had a connection with this person in whatever way, and that had been cut off.
The texting carried on for days, but Stacey wasn't equipped to deal with this kind of abuse from Armour.
She was petrified. She was petrified. Some of the texts were obscene. They were, and I said, what did he say? What do the messages say? And she just said, I'll show you when you come through, Mum. She said, I'll let you listen to them when you come through.
Armour wasn't giving up. So once Stacey had shown her mother the texts, she told her to go straight to the police.
She told the police about the messages, and they went round to see Terence Armour to ask him to leave Stacey alone. And I believe, it did come out in court that he was verbally abusive to the officer who went round. He said, get out of here before I knock you off your effing feet.
This made him very, very angry, I think. And he left a voice message on Stacey's phone saying that she should never send the police around to see him again, and that he'd had enough of it. I think that was what he said.
Armour was furious. He decided he would teach Stacey a lesson she could never forget. He'd kill her. It was the beginning of Terence Armour's countdown to murder. Stacey ignored Armour's warning, and on Saturday the 21st of January, called for help again.
She'd called the police again because she'd had more messages. And I believe they were due to go around on the Sunday. And I said, good, because I can be there, because I take Imogen back to school on a Sunday. But they turned up a day early. And by the time she got to the intercom, there was no one there. So she rang me and she said, the police have been. I said, I thought they were coming tomorrow. And she said, yeah, but by the time I got there, they were driving away.
The police had been called to another incident in Kendal. When they returned to Cragview later that day, they talked to the staff, but not to Stacey.
So about 45 minutes later, Stacey rang me back and she said, the police have been back. And I said, oh, what happened? And she said, they didn't come in to see me. They went into the office.
Staff at the home thought it might actually cause Stacey more distress. Stacey was in that complex because she was a vulnerable person. She had a lot of issues. She was starting to see life as it should be. And the staff at the complex felt that if the police did speak to her, it might actually cause more distress, more harm than good.
I called up Cragview and I played hell. I said, why haven't they been in to see Stacey? And it had been decided that it wasn't necessary. And I said I was really cross, and I said I believed this man to be a real threat to my daughter, and that it was my intention to bring Stacey home, where I believed she would be safe.
Armour was out drowning his sorrows that week. And when he took a taxi home, he confided in the driver.
He was being quite offensive and ranting about her and saying that he was angry about the fact that he'd done a lot for her and she was now rejecting him. And I think he said that she was no better than a slapper to him.
The other interesting part of that conversation was he was asking questions about where he could get battery acid from, which the taxi driver thought was an extremely strange conversation, bearing in mind he was in a taxi and had no great use for battery acid.
Jackie started making plans to bring Stacey home. She knew Armour was dangerous.
I had a sixth sense. I don't know what it was. I just felt really uneasy about him. Just didn't think the situation was going to go away.
She was right. Armour was putting together his deadly plan.
He set a fire just by the front door, and the only reason to do that is to stop anybody getting out, because it's the first floor flat, there's no other way of getting out.
"34-year-old Stacey Mackie from Kendal, Cumbria, met and became friends with 59-year-old Terence Armour, who'd just lost his wife to cancer.
For Terence Armour, losing his partner was probably more dramatic. It's my belief, given how he progressed his relationship with Stacey, that he did control his wife. He may have been a little bit dominant within that relationship, and the loss of that person to actually lean on, to actually be able to control someone, sometimes can be of more of a loss than someone that you actually do genuinely care for.
But when Stacey broke off her friendship with Armour, he started threatening her. And when she went to the police, he decided to kill her. Stacey's mum sensed the danger and was preparing to bring her home, but Armour was preparing to kill.
Staff had said that she was bright and chatty, she was in good spirits, and she'd gone to try and get involved in volunteering for the Cumbria Volunteer Service, which is an agency in Cumbria which just helps people with all sorts of volunteering, really. So it might be going to someone's home if they're disabled or elderly and helping them out, or involved in conservation or whatever it may be.
On Thursday, the 26th of January, he gathered together a selection of items at his flat.
An axe, plastic bag in which he had a roll of tape, 2 knives, a large knife and a Stanley knife.
There was some string inside the carrier bag, which we believe was there to tie her hands if necessary, and a screwdriver.
Armour also had 2 bottles of white spirit. He would later claim he had them because he had been decorating his house.
There was no signs of any decorating, and why would you need 2 bottles of white spirit, particularly in his, condition where he physically would have struggled to do that.
For Stacey, Friday the 27th of January was a normal day. Late afternoon, and she kept an appointment that she always looked forward to.
She'd been swimming. She'd been to the hydrotherapy pool.
She'd returned home and she was in the flat, and there was nothing of any great significance in terms of what Stacey did that day.
Terence Armour was in his flat waiting for nightfall, preparing to kill himself and take Stacey with him. With his killing kit prepared, he chose his last meal to be his favourite.
I think he'd had a Chinese that night as well. I think part of his account was that he'd had a Chinese at home.
When he'd finished his takeaway, he packed his killing kit into a carrier bag and left his flat. Tonight, he would leave his wheelchair at home. 1.5 miles away in Cragview, Stacey turned on the TV in her bedroom and climbed into bed. Armour took a taxi to Cragview and was dropped off around the corner.
We know that Armour arrived at the flat just before midnight. We also know that he tried to break into the building by other windows and other doors. It was only when one of the residents, unfortunately, left the latch on that he was able to get in.
But at that time, Armour was seen getting inside by another resident who dialed 999.
People's view was he was housebound, he was wheelchair-bound, and it was a great surprise when we actually watched the CCTV at the hostel to see what he was actually capable of.
And then from the CCTV footage, you can see him taking out a screwdriver and a hammer, and he's banging on the door to try and open up her door. This carries on for a while.
From the CCTV, which was incredibly clear, which is quite an unusual event. Certainly at the time, a lot of the CCTV that you used to get was very grainy and you couldn't make out image, but this was like basically watching television.
Stacey was lying in bed, dozing off when she heard the banging at her door.
I can only imagine that night she must have been asleep. She must have been in bed and asleep. And him with the axe at the door, trying to break in, perhaps she tried to put it, he was there for several minutes. Perhaps she tried to put it out of her mind, the noise that she was hearing.
When Armour was bashing on the door trying to get in, we think Stacey has come out of her bedroom where she was watching TV. The main TV was actually in the bedroom rather than in the lounge. She's clearly had the duvet wrapped round her.
She'd confided at times to Armour that she thought she heard things, and I could only imagine that she's probably pulled the duvet around her, which would be typical what Stacey would do, and gone to the door.
As Stacey opened the door, Armour burst in. Armour shut the front door, poured white spirit around the foot of the frame, and set light to it. It was suicidal behaviour.
So as soon as he's gone in through that front door, he set a fire just by the front door, and the only reason to do that is to stop anybody getting out, because it's a first floor flat, there's no other way of getting out.
We can only assume, as he went equipped, that he had intent. But his scenario, the vision he had of what was going to happen in that flat, may or may not match on to what actually did happen. And I would imagine in certain aspects it definitely didn't happen as Armour had hoped. There may have been an element of this in the fact that Armour was actually trapped in the flat with Stacey. He wasn't free and easily able to get out. Maybe this was bad planning, or maybe there had been an element when he carried that white spirit into the flat that he was going to end everything if he didn't get his own way.
Armour then ran into the lounge where Stacey was standing, crying, and threw white spirit over her. But at that point, it seemed Armour changed his mind about suicide.
After he'd set fire to Stacey, he went into the bedroom. We aren't sure whether the window was already open, but certainly when the officers went round the back, the window was open and he was shouting from the window for assistance. It was a very, very short period of time. The police were there within 5 minutes and immediately went into the complex and tried to break down the doors themselves and couldn't do it. Eventually the door was opened using one of the rams that we have in our vehicles, and the officers were able to not so much rescue Stacey out. Stacey came to the door and was led away from the flat. Armour was still inside. It had almost extinguished itself on Stacey. As she left the flat, there was a couple of small pieces of what was left of her nightdress that was still smouldering that the police brushed off. But other than that, she was naked and the flames were already out on her.
Armour too was rescued from the flat with only minor injuries, but exhibited bizarre behaviour.
He had his eyes closed completely and he refused to open his eyes because, well, presumably because he was so horrified by what he had seen, or he was trying to somehow block it out.
He had perhaps exerted that horrible, fatal, ultimate control over Stacey, but this was not the kind of scenario that he perhaps envisioned in his daydreams. I think he was not only unhappy about what he had done himself, I think that he actually wanted to deny it ever happened, not just to others as a cover for what he'd done, but quite simply to himself as well. He did not want to believe that it actually had happened, and happened so badly.
She told paramedics it was Armour who'd attacked her and that she was desperate for her mother.
She said, "I need medical assistance. I hurt." She said, "I want my mum." And she gave out my telephone numbers, clearly and concisely, with horrific injuries. I don't know how she walked out of there with the injuries that she had sustained.
Stacey was rushed to hospital, but her mother wasn't there to meet her.
She said, "I don't want you to put me to sleep because I know I'm not going to wake up and I want my mum." And they told her I was on my way, but I wasn't. It was 2 hours later before I was sent for.
Terence Armour was arrested.
He was arrested for the attempted murder because obviously at that point Stacey was still alive, and there was also further offences in relation to endangering the lives of other people who were resident in that complex.
Stacey had made it to hospital, but was fighting for her life.
When I got there, the police officer who'd been at the scene that evening, she stood outside. And I said, "He did this to her, didn't he? I knew." And she just nodded. And then a nurse came out and took me into the room where Stacey lay. And she was under a lot of blankets. They explained everything to me. You know, they had to keep her warm even though she'd suffered horrific burns.
Stacey had managed to protect her face and head, but she'd been severely burned across the rest of her body. Many of the burns were deep third-degree burns. With such catastrophic trauma, her body had gone into shock. Blood plasma rushed from Stacey's core to the surface to protect it from infection. As these fluids leaked away, doctors tried in vain to replace them. Third-degree burn patients like Stacey do not necessarily feel pain as her nerve endings had been burnt off.
And I went and sat with her, and I held her hand. And I remember thinking that she was sweating because her hand was dripping. It was dripping onto my clothes. But it wasn't, it was the fluid that was seeping from her body because of the burns. And then they said that they were going to operate to alleviate some of the pressure on her chest. But then at the last minute they changed their minds. And then eventually a doctor came in, followed by 2 nurses. And he told me a lot of technical jargon that I didn't fully understand. And I said, "What are you telling me? Are you telling me that my daughter is going to die?" And they said, yes, her injuries were unsurvivable. And I said, when? And they said, they couldn't say precisely, but they said it wouldn't be very long. And I said, I just want to be with her. I was assured that she wasn't in any pain. She was on a lot of equipment. And even so, you know, with her being on a ventilator, they were still having to sort of bag her by hand at times. And they withdrew a lot of the medication that they were giving Stacey. Not pain relief, she was never in any pain. And at one point, even though all the equipment was still bleeping and whatnot, the charge nurse said, "Stacey's passed away now." And that was about 3:30 in the afternoon. But she wasn't declared. She wasn't pronounced dead by a doctor until about 4 p.m. I mean, you couldn't do that to anything or anybody. You can't even contemplate it. You can't contemplate that somebody would be capable. If, you know, after it had happened, if I'd had the opportunity, if the police, somebody said, "Here is Terence Armour, he's on this chair, you can do to him what he did to your daughter," I still couldn't do it. I couldn't do what he'd done.
That afternoon, Terence Armour was charged with the murder of Stacey Mackie. He denied it, and instead told an unconvincing and fanciful story.
He had this completely bizarre story that he had gone into the toilet and she had somehow set herself on fire while she was trying to light a cigarette.
The trial of Terence Armour began on the 13th of June 2012, here at Carlisle Crown Court.
We were initially shocked really to hear that he had pleaded not guilty, because it seemed so open and shut, the fact that he was obviously the one responsible.
Armour's demeanour throughout the entire interview process, denied what took place. He tried to suggest that Stacey had set fire to herself, which was incredible. He offered no explanation whatsoever. He obviously put Jackie through the court process. Never once did he utter any words of remorse or offer any apologies or give any explanation as to why he even did what he did.
He had this completely bizarre story that he had gone into the toilet and she had somehow set herself on fire while she was trying to light a cigarette. And the defence was essentially that she had done this to herself because she was upset and depressed and suffering from mental disorders herself at the time.
We worked closely with the fire service, and as a result of that we were able to establish that the toilet door hadn't been opened during the course of the fire by the marks and the smoke and the damage that was caused. We were able to identify various things within the flat in terms of why on earth would Stacey do that if she was setting fire to herself. There was a seat of fire by the front door, and that was there to prevent her from escaping. There's no doubt about that.
He was quite aggressive, really, in his denial. He didn't show any remorse at all. He was just completely insistent that he hadn't done anything wrong and that this had happened and he was an innocent party in it.
But the jury didn't believe him, and on the 20th of June, after just a week in court, Terence Armour was found guilty of murder.
He tried to play very much on his disability. He tried to get the sympathy of the judge and the jury in terms of how he sat and how he presented, and he couldn't walk, etc. But the fact that everybody was able to see the CCTV of him going into the flat and hammering the door and subsequently coming out showed quite clearly that it was just a facade that he was trying to create.
You know, I just thought he was going to tell the truth. He took the oath. He didn't have to take the oath, but he did take the oath. You know, if I took the oath and swore on the Bible to tell the truth, I would.
Terence Armour was sentenced to 27 years in prison.
I'd like to talk to him. I'd like to ask him why. What Stacey had done. She hadn't done anything that made him want to take her life in the way that he did. Because of a friendship that he'd broken off.
I know, like, some people say that there's not a lot of people like him, but then I know that all the good people put together still can't bring her back, and all it takes is one person like that to destroy everything, because nothing's going to be the same, really.
He'll spend the rest of his days